This AI refuses to answer. Now, it doesn't work to please you, it works to help you think. What is the typical HR's reaction? Yes, we adopt AI, and they go straight away into the execution. The friction that is missing is asking the person, are we actually ready as an organization to adopt AI?
People are actually not ready for this kind of technology because it's just going to cause so much of disruption and it's going to be used wrongly.
In the urgency of trying to perform, you give up the agency of trying to discern.
They're losing the cognitive ability, so they're basically contracting their thinking to the technology and they're taking it as it comes.
AI is not accountable, but the human is.
Both of us are definitely also pro-human, and the pro-human part is what takes precedence over the pro-innovation.
These are the people that should steward AI adoption in the organization simply because they are setting the example of not outsourcing the agency to the AI.
If you talk to the mirror, what you hear is yourself, right?
Everybody talks about AI, how powerful the AI, how fast the AI can come out with an answer and things like that. But is that the right answer? Nobody is questioning.
I have two doctors on the call, so it's actually quite intimidating for me, not for you. So I have Dr. Thaatch. So Dr. Thaatch is a social legal scholar and deputy head of school for research at Monash University, Malaysia. For over 2 decades, she's worked at the hardest edges of human rights law, the death penalty, migration, the rights of communities the system is built to overlook. Chevening scholar educated at Cardiff, Oxford, Brookes, and Monash, she studies law not as rules on a page, but as a living social force that shapes who gets to have agency and who doesn't. That question, who gets to be free, is exactly what brings her to the work we're discussing today. And Dr. Arul is also on the call today. He spent more than 20 years optimizing the spine of global business as a regional transformation director and managing director in logistics, a Lean Six Sigma master black belt, and author on Drucker and the discipline of execution. When he turned all that rigor towards a different question, not how to make systems faster or less costly and better quality, was the last one, but how to make leaders more present. Today, through Emergence Mirror Labs, he builds what he calls governed AI, companions designed to develop human capability rather than replace it. He calls himself a chief meaning officer, bridging code and conscience. So before we start, what do you guys feel today? What's alive in each of you as we walk into this conversation? Maybe Dr. Arul, you want to start? Because Dr. Thaatch will be first after.
Yeah, the time is perfect just before June 30th, where we actually are launching the governed agentic AI, as you had mentioned. So I'm quite excited about that.
Thank you. Dr. Thaatch, what's alive in you?
Well, I'm alive, Matti. So I'm grateful for that. I'm also grateful for your invitation to talk about something that's been in the news, in the social media, and definitely on my mind. And I think it also connects with whatever research that I've been doing on human rights in particular, and my own self-interest in someone's physical, emotional, intellectual, as well as spiritual development.
Cool. In 1 or 2 sentences, what do you do? I gave an intro. Was I correct in any way? Anything you want to correct from what I said?
No, your intro was perfect, actually.
Okay.
It captures everything that I do. I also teach human rights, and I have before this also taught subjects on ethics and corporate global governance as well. And I've also looked at another subject, which is a very law subject. It's called equity and trust. And it talks a lot about bringing in equitable notions and that whole perspective of what it means to be a human person with agency and then how it connects to the law and so on.
Yeah. What led you to this rabbit hole?
Yeah, it is a rabbit hole. It definitely is. And I think anyone who goes into a sort of research adventure, and that doesn't need to be formal research, doing a master's or a PhD, it can be a self-exploration. It could be digging into more information. And I think I've always been that person since I was a child. I always needed answers. And so any sort of social phenomenon that occurs, I need to know why it's happening. And that curiosity has always stayed with me. So a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, I've ventured into many things. AI was a very big thing that sort of disrupted the whole world. And it's disrupted so many industries, including the one that I'm in. So especially in higher education industry, we deal with this not just in the research realm, but also very particularly with students in teaching. And so I needed to know more and more about it.
You spoke about law as rules and then law as social phenomenon. Can you tell us a bit about this way of talking about the law, which is a bit different from the one I've learned about and try to stay away from, actually?
Yeah, I don't blame you. So in terms of law, as a lot of people know, they know it as rules, regulations, they know it as the black and white, what's written on a legislation or an act or a statute or a rule book. And that is the version of law I think everybody is familiar with. So we all know that we encounter law in our everyday lives. We encounter it the moment we wake up in the morning because we could be living in a property that we own legally, or we could be renting a property, which means we're a tenant. So we have all of these legal realities around us all the time. So when I was doing my PhD, I wanted to study the phenomenon of minority mobilization in Malaysia. And when I was looking at this phenomenon, which is a very social science subject matter, I realized that the law comes in a lot of spaces in this phenomenon. And as I was looking for answers, because I couldn't find the answers in the law books, because the Constitution says one thing, that there's equality and so on, but the reality is quite different. And even if I looked at any sort of case law, it would tell me one thing, but the cases themselves are very specific to particular problems that people are experiencing. So it doesn't explain the phenomenon that was occurring. And so I sort of dug further in, and then I found that there is this area called social legal studies. And in the US, they call it law and society. And so these were actually those that dared to step out of the law and also look at social phenomenon from other perspectives. So it sort of widened my perspective. And instead of looking at things in a very narrow way, I started looking at it at a more broader perspective, but also getting the broader picture, which is like seeing the forest and not just focusing on the tree. And that's how I got into this area. And then I realized that there are other sort of things that we can look into. For example, everyday law. What does everyday law look like to the ordinary person on the street? What is legal consciousness? That is also another area that I was keen on. So what does it mean to you as an individual? How do you feel about the country that you live in and the rules that you are adhering to? What happens when something happens to you, whether it's a harm, and where do you go to seek redress or a remedy? And so this is how I came into this area. But as I went deeper into it, I also realized that not every human person is on equal footing. We all have our structural situations, and some of these structural situations also involve things like perhaps poverty. It could be disability. It could be problems that they are facing because of their identity, for example, because of who they were born to, which family they are part of, which community they came into. So these are all things that is beyond one's control. And how does the law actually address this? And are they put on these two concepts of equality and equity? It's not the same. So that's where I centered my research and my interest on.
I'm not a legal expert at all, so I'm trying to make sense of what you just said. Would it be making sense to think that the law as rules is a very narrow map of the territory, and what you're trying to do is explore the entire territory with all the different dimensions, considering law as one of those dimensions, but not the only one, and then basically you expand the understanding beyond law, but with the full awareness of law of a legal expert, whereas I would have a full understanding of the territory without the map of the law. You have the law, and so you can understand it differently than me. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The law is its own world because it's very much to do with the court system, very much to do with the rules, very much to do with how lawyers interact in the courts and talk to their clients. It's a very unique world that sort of just revolves around what the black letter of the law says. And basically what I did was to jump out of the black letter and look at the gray areas, the uncertainties, the things that the law doesn't explicitly talk about, and also the way in which society is constructed, because we are always constantly under a lot of social pressures, and there's also political pressure as well. So the law and society interacts in many ways. The law and politics interacts in many ways. So that's why I felt that it was important to see how law, society, and politics works hand in hand. And this can including sociological perspectives, for example, or even anthropological perspectives. So different sort of lenses that we use to look at a particular problem.
Thank you. You've been working a lot on people with the least agency. I think this podcast is about agency, so it's an interesting viewpoint that you have. How does those 2 decades working with people with the least agency inform us who may have more agency, and especially people who will be listening in leadership positions? How can we learn about those people?
So I've been working, I first started by looking at minorities and marginalized communities in Malaysia. And I started by looking at one that's very close to my heart because it's about a migrant community that was brought to Malaysia as a labor force during the British colonial times. And they worked on the plantations and the kind of problems that they faced during the colonial period. And this was very interesting to me. And then I realized, do they actually have agency? Because you are basically a labor force. You are brought in. And of course, slavery was already abolished at this point. But what the system was is what they call the indentured contract. And so that already creates this unevenness between the person who creates the contract, which is the British colonial force, and you're looking at a very poor laborer that came from the south of India, basically coming with nothing really, over a very long journey on a ship, just so that they could work, so that they could earn a little bit of money and send it back to their families. Of course, this is what sort of attracted me in the first place. And that's when after I finished that research, I also realized that this is not just simply about a minority. It is also about migration. It is also about labor. So these two became very interesting to me when I was studying this. And so I proceeded to look at migration and then particularly looking at migrant labor. And when I was looking at migrant labor, I realized that in Malaysia, even though we've gone through that colonial phase, we are now in a very different era. We are talking about, there's lots of rhetoric on the news and on social media. Sometimes it amazes me when I hear Malaysians say things like, send them back, right? And this is a very normal rhetoric we've seen all throughout the world. Even now, we can see that happening in the UK, in Australia, in the USA, in lots of parts of Europe. Send the migrant labor back. But it's not so simple, is it? Because if we were to send all the migrant labor from Malaysia out, do you think this country will continue to exist as it is? So these are the populations that we brought. We put them on a contract. And so what kind of agency would they have? Because they are working for money. Are they protected by the law? Do they have protection from employers who might exploit them? Do they have protection against the immigration rules? So I was looking at various aspects of migration and labor, but I also realized that labor is not the same. You can see that there is the more privileged people who come in, like more foreign nationals who work in, say, multinational corporations, and they are a lot more secured because they have a contract that protects them. And they have that education to understand what they're signing and what are the benefits that they're getting from doing this work and so on. And you also have semi-skilled labor who come in and they may not have that kind of leverage compared to the more expatriate community in Malaysia. But having said that, they are still not at the bottom of the hierarchy. And I do say hierarchy because I believe there is one. At the very bottom, you find that you see the labor force that's basically working in the construction industry, those who are doing the 3D jobs, as they call it, the dirty jobs, the dangerous jobs, the jobs that basically Malaysians don't want to do. These are the people with the least agency because they have standard contracts. They are brought in by agents. Sometimes they don't know what's happening. They are put into crowded spaces. Do they have the basic needs? Do they have basic healthcare? And they come from various countries around us. So these were the interesting things that I think I wanted to question to see how the law would help or doesn't help. And sometimes the law is in the way because these are the people who sometimes face discrimination, not just from Malaysians, they also face a lot of problems from law enforcement authorities. And then, of course, then there's another group of people, like refugees, for example. So these are people who don't come in for labor, but they do come here to Malaysia or anywhere else in the world because they are forced to, because there's war in their home country or there is some sort of environmental problem in the country and they are forced to flee. And although there are United Nations agencies and so on that help and assist, but there's only so much they can do. So these groups of people basically are in Malaysia. Sometimes they don't have the right to work. How do they survive? Where do they get their food? And then Malaysians continue to discriminate because they are from another country. So these are the problems that refugees would face. And that is even a more severe problem because the lack of agency in terms of even getting your basic needs met.
Thank you for sharing. So I think you give us the grounding of where you come from. And I think there's social activism in your veins. That's an interesting point of view. And I think that I would value this actually if I was doing choices of AI to work with. I think it's really important, although it might not be the topic people might click when they see the AI bit. At least they understand the grounding of where you come from and what ideas you bring with you and perspectives when you target that question. So just to connect everything you just said, and we understand you more deeply now, what led you specifically to start thinking about AI? Because we could see these things quite separate. I think the agency bit, I can totally see it now, but I've been in those workshops. So how would you connect all this career that you've had, I think 2-3 decades maybe, thinking about those topics, to this topic of AI and agency? And I think the topic that I'm working with right now is the AI that will not give you an answer. Because I think it's catchy, but it's also because I think we need that agency back. And I think this is a statement that is very strong. It's a kind of clickbaity, it's on purpose, but it reflects the thinking behind the AI. So please help us connect the dots.
I've always been interested in technology. And of course, every new technology that comes in has been purposeful for human development. It has been purposeful for social and nation development as well. When AI started to peak, actually, I'll tell you this story. So somebody that I know actually messaged and I said, have you heard of artificial intelligence? And I said, well, I've heard about it because I've watched the movies. So that's about what I know, right? And they were talking about this, basically talking about ChatGPT, about how this will give you answers. It will help you do a lot of things. So I was curious. And so I started testing it out. But then I found it a bit tedious and I was wondering, what is it trying to do? I'm asking it a question. And at that time, ChatGPT was very new and it was giving a lot of wrong answers. And I think I got frustrated and I decided, okay, I'm not going to use this because it looks like it's new. It's just being tested out. It's still not there yet. Then I think I left it as it is, but then I was reading more about it. So there were lots of write-ups emerging at that time. And these write-ups were talking about how this technology was evolving, and it was very much based on the input that humans were putting into it. So whatever it was receiving, it was basically vomiting it back. Very not unlike students these days, because they just tell you what what you just said at lecture or tutorial. So I realized that, okay, maybe it's just at a very infant stage, right? Because I think as an educator, we see the development of a person and I don't see them at primary or secondary school. I see them when they're grown adults. They are in their 20s, maybe 19, right? And I see how they develop in the learning space, how they change and how the maturity evolves. And it was very much like how AI started to be. And I think when I started using it again, I realized that, wow, this is actually getting much better because it's doing so much better than what it did earlier. And then the controversy started arising. So this conversation about the controversies and the way AI was being pushed to every industry and basically pushed down a lot of people's throats made me realize that people are actually not ready for this kind of technology because it's just going to cause so much of disruption and it's going to be used wrongly. And that's the conversation I had with my circle of colleagues, my circle of friends. And then Arul and I had this conversation a lot as well. And then he, of course, took it from a different direction because he comes from a very science, technology, engineering sort of background. And I was totally coming from a humanities, arts, social science sort of perspective at it. And I was actually quite resistant to this idea being a solution because I was starting to see how it could be misused. And then I also started reading a lot on what was happening, like how people were using it in deepfake and basically manipulating this technology to cause a lot of harm to people. And that's when the question of, oh, this is actually something that needs to be legally constrained. And I think when the European Union AI Act came in and I went through the act, I realized that the law was taking a very good sort of standpoint at controlling this technology. But technology moves so quickly, the development of law is always slow, right? And however fast we try to make it be, it never catches up with the technology because we can have a law today and then tomorrow AI will just turn into something else, right? So it's always been a struggle, I think, with law and technology. But I came across this during my work, not just as a researcher, but also as an educator, because then we started realizing that the university was facing another big problem because students were using ChatGPT and other sorts of generative AI, LLMs, to do their assessments. And this is where the conundrum began because what do you do? Well, the most obvious is ban ChatGPT. But can you? So that's another problem, right? Because you can't just ban this technology because students are definitely going to use it. Because cheating in exams and assessments has existed, I don't know, since the beginning of assessments, right? I don't know when, probably during the Aristotle and Socrates period, I don't know. But the different ways that cheating is done has changed because technology has now come in and enabled some of these behaviors, which is not so good for the student. It's not so good for the educators, not so good for the university as a whole. So how do we address this? So the university took a good approach to it, I would say. So they created a AI policy when it came to education. And what they sort of focused on was, let's not ban this, but rather let's control it, let's manage it. But then the question is, can you control and manage it? Because it is so fast-paced, it's like moving at lightning speed. So we can try the way that we can. So the university took what they call a programmatic approach to AI and tried to incorporate it as much as possible so that we allow the students to use AI. Not all of us, of course. There are academics who are not happy with the way AI is going. And so there are also resistance to use of AI, which is totally understandable, by the way. So I think we need to hear those messages as well. We need to understand where they're coming from. So the core thing is a human person now is basically giving their agency off because when they use the ChatGPT, what students do anyway is they don't have that ability to discern yet. And that discernment, because it's missing, I'm not saying all students, but a majority, it's always the bulk of students using it. The very good students are probably discerning and they're understanding, like what I probably did when I first started using it, that it gave me the wrong answers. And I became aware of this. So there are a minority of students who are using it and are aware it might give you the wrong answer. So you need to be the one that's checking the answers to make sure that you get it correct. So a lot of the students don't do this because they lack that capacity to discern, and they also lack that maturity to basically question a system that's basically spotting out answers to your assessment question, for example. So the way we assess has to change, and it is changing. It is forced to change anyway. We could go back to pen and paper of the past, which is examinations, but I doubt that is going to be the case because in many situations, I think we've gone into assessment structures that are quite complex and it requires a lot of complex thinking, and there's different ways of looking at this. The core message is that students they're losing the cognitive ability. So they're basically contracting their thinking to the technology and they're taking it as it comes. And this is where the bigger problem will lie because they are individuals who will graduate and enter the workforce and go to various industries. And so what's going to happen there? That is one concern. The other concern is also the de-skilling that happens with AI. Are we losing our basic skills, such as reading and writing, for example? And there's been a lot of research on this about how reading and writing is actually very important for brain development. And so if we increasingly lose that as we go into this age of AI, are we going to face other cognitive problems that might arise? And of course, the other issue also, in far as industry is concerned, a lot of employees now to use AI. So they're actually forcing AI also to the employees. Now, do the employees have any agency? So that is also another question at hand. Or are they being forced to use it? So some might dabble with it, some might learn it, some might figure out, okay, I can use it for such and such, might go for trainings and so on. But essentially, there are those that might actually get the AI to do some simple tasks, maybe not also do the checking, not also having the discernment and the ability to control and manage the AI rather than the AI control and manage them. So I think these are some of the issues that I feel that how AI came into my thought processes.
Interesting. I forgot about the being a teacher, professor part. So yeah, thank you for bringing this. Dr. Arul, let's talk about you a little bit so that we also can connect you to the topic. How do you introduce yourself these days? And maybe that's the first question for you.
Still call myself Arul, introduce myself Arul, right? But if you're asking about profession, how do I introduce? I don't know. It's because I keep moving around an area. So I guess the better definition is system architect, right? Because I've been in the transformation space for over 20 years. And over the last 10 years, most of the transformation involved the inclusion or the introduction of digital technology, right? So then everybody started coining it as digital transformation. But in that period, I started to look at end-to-end and how an organization operates, whether with digital technology or without digital technology, from an end-to-end point of view. So that's the organizational system, and it's close to systems thinking. And in transformation, you need to then architect, because you are changing from an old system to a new system. Even though it's minor, it's still, you need an architect to have a visualization of how before and after looks like. And then you go and execute. So it's just like any, if you're doing a home renovation, you still need an architect to come up with the simplest of design so that the contractor that comes in that will follow that design and build. So at least what is built at the end is exactly as what you concept. So that's the systems architect analogy that I could think of. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that. If you summarize your work to one question, what would it be? You wrote one book on transformation, and it was about, I try to summarize it, cost, quality, and speed. That's the first career that I understand you had. And then since then, you've been working more on leadership topics. Can you tell us a bit that arc, how it's been happening in your life?
So the first book, I wrote it in 2009, and Dr. Thaatch is the one that edited that book. Without her help, that book would have been too technical and quite difficult to read. She just helped to make the language more simpler and easier to. So that was the idea of change. And that book was called Changing Within Success. Now, for me being from the engineering and science background, I still wanted to write a technical book. Then I went on to write a second book, which was all on the tools that you would use when you do a change project or a transformation project. And so that's the Lean Six Sigma Practitioner's Toolbook. And over the years, doing major transformation projects, and then during the COVID, I started to write the third book, which is what you have read, which is called Talking Transformation. So that's the entire experience of applying the knowledge, the knowledge and ideas that was introduced in the first two books. And all of this got applied in industry and delivered massive results. Something that I'm very proud of, because I was at that time the director of transformation for Geodis Asia Pacific, and the CEO, my boss, he appointed me to be the director of transformation. I said, well, we've got to change things around. 5-year plan and 7 different work stream products and services areas and HR, and we change it so that we can grow rapidly. So it took about 4 years to do that work, but by the time, at the end of the 4th year, the growth of that business jumped from 1 billion euro in 2019, right, to 2 billion euros in 2023, at the end of 2022. And they associated majority of that work from the transformation work that was done, because the transformation helped to set the culture and the thinking. And we looked at everything from an end-to-end point of view. What's the systems thinking behind it, right? And of course, there's the good stuff, and then there's stuff that needs improvement. And that's when I shifted into focusing on leadership thinking, because through experience, I know that if the leaders that drive those industries, if they don't shift their thinking, the transformation really cannot happen. Or even if it happened, it would not remain that way for a long period of time, right? Because our natural tendency is to always fall back to what we are familiar with. So change, I like to sign off as change is the only constant, right? But that's the reality. Nobody seems to adopt that. We can say change is the only constant, right? So you keep changing, but then when it really matters to remain change, it's a leadership issue. And that was the question that I started to think about a lot after writing the third book.
Did you change your mind on the way, or it was more like a incremental discovery and you kept discovering more principles and more of the dynamics of leadership? Or you had more an epiphany where you thought things were a way and then they were actually different from what you were thinking? How was the improvement?
Retrospectively, it also changed the way I thought, because prior to that, for me, leadership was part of execution. So they needed to be there, they need to lead, and they need to drive. And along the ways, those that cannot follow that path, they tend to drop off. And as leaders, we accept that part of it, right? But then what happens when you look into a change scenario where you walk in, you think that you already have the ground map and the terrain and things like that, and you have a clear plan, and then suddenly everything gets disrupted. When the terrain changes, the way you navigate changes and things like that. What would a leader need to do at that point? So that was the questions that I started to think about, because everybody says that, yeah, we're good at transforming and we have done transformation projects, but the challenge has always been in the leadership space, especially when the ground shifts, the terrain shifts. And that's where leadership and the leadership ability becomes very, very important. I looked at my own failures to begin with, where I went wrong, where I made mistakes, and I started to reflect on that.
When we met, and I think that's the reason why actually I was interested in speaking more and more to you, you talked to me about adult development theory, which to me is something that should be the main focus of everyone. But that's a black and white way of seeing reality. So I'll try to not to be attached too much to that framework. But basically, for the people who are listening to us, I'll just give a tiny run through. One, most people are in the socialized mind. That's why Dr. Thaatch has most of the students trying to follow whatever she says and trying to digest back, vomit back, give back the concept that she teaches. Then you have the next level would be self-authoring mind, where you actually come up with your own ideas, your own framework, but it tends to be a black and white way of thinking the world, which is what leads you to think about self-transforming minds, which is more equanimity. Everything is gray and everything is real and true at the same time. It's just a matter of perspective. So that's more the monk or the coach point of view, the person that is not executing, but more trying to help the executant. So that's the board maybe in an organization more than the people executing. So to me, there's those three people, three different minds, three different ways of seeing the world and thinking. And when this concept happened to you, when did you start getting familiar with it? Was it early in your career that you knew about this, or you discovered late? And was it part of the AI project, or it existed before, that awareness of this concept?
So there were three core theories, right? What you discussed or what you just introduced, socialized mind, self-authoring mind, and self-transforming mind. Those theories were developed by Robert Kegan, or Kegan's theories, right? But prior to that, I was introduced to Professor George Coloiza by Roshan, our good friend from Literonomics. And he was helping Literonomics when he was based here, and then subsequently he continued to help, even though he's now back as a professor in IMD. He introduced the secure-based theory and the CAT to that. So whenever I had a chance to meet him when he was in Asia, I'll meet him, have a cup of coffee, and we have lots of conversation. And what stayed in my mind since my first deep conversation with him is the analogy putting the fish on the table. Now, that's not the first time I heard an analogy about fish and being it on the table, right? My personal mentor would always say that you need to put the fish on the table because you need to see where the rotting is happening, and fish normally rots from the head. And his meaning of that is that if it's rotting from the head, that means it's at the leadership. And Professor George talks about it from different perspectives. Putting fish on the table means let everybody see the problem and have the same understanding, right? But from a leadership perspective, keep it open, keep it transparent, talk about it. So along the way, you develop the trust amongst those that are working to solve their problem, right? So these were bits that I was missing when I was running transformation projects, because in an organization, you would have leaders that want the transformation, they would own it, they would drive it. Then you will have leaders that say, the boss said so we have to do it, but their internal compass is not totally aligned. And then you also have leaders that just totally against it because they are more comfortable with the way things are, because that's where their skill sets are, their strengths are, and things like that. So changing means they have to learn something new, do things differently, and everything. And they start making mistakes when they become exposed. So when I started to look at that, I looked at my decisions that I made over the years, especially at work and so on. Then from Professor George's theory, the secure-based theory, then I discovered Robert Kegan. And Robert Kegan's theory was interesting because the concept of socialized mind, self-altering mind, and self-transforming mind. I could then visualize the socialized mind in most organizations. Your workforce would end up falling in that category. At least 2/3 of your workforce would fall. That means, what does it mean? They want to do something good. They want their bosses to validate them. They want to feel appreciated and so on and so forth, right? They want to feel recognized, but they want to do the job, but they cannot make a decision on their own. They need somebody else to confirm and validate what they're doing is right, and then give them a pat on the back. Now, that sounds very familiar, right? That's happening across many, many industries and many organizations. So it shifted from execution thinking to behavioral and cultural thinking, right? Then I looked at self-altering mind, and this is where the 3 types of leadership that I just explained click, because self-altering mind means you are a leader. You know how to make decisions. You know how to set rules and policies and directions and so on. But fundamentally, that is based on a set of belief systems. That belief system evolves over time through experience, through doing something right, doing something wrong, and so on and so forth. And it becomes very, very solidified, and you become a very, very strong leader. The self-altering mind leaders are leaders that have seen success, and some have seen failures. But most of the time, they remain at that level of maturity because they are successful. But when the terrain shifts, or when the map shifts, and you need to now bring out your compass and restart again and figure out which direction that you need to go, sometimes these types of leaders, they collapse because that change in the environment, the terrain, the map, suddenly forces you to think outside of the box, which could also be outside what they believe as right. When that happens, self-altering leaders also collapse. And then you and I talk about self-transforming mind, the Zen state. Now, let's go back to the socialized mind and self-altering mind. In a work environment, between these two mindsets, there's always friction. And friction is what gives the workforce some life, because without that friction, people won't know. There won't be any feedback. There won't be any decisions to say this is right, this is wrong, or there won't be any advice to say they go in this direction, leave this one out, so on and so forth. You need that friction. Now, self-transforming mind are leaders that can hold that friction in a very stable manner. They don't react to the friction, and they don't have to act to the friction. So they keep everything in balance until they get clarity. From clarity, then you get discernment, and discernment into better decision making. So that's how the thinking evolved. And it ties back to the area that Dr. Thaatch was looking at. agency, right? Because once we start talking about socialized mind, right? So these are those that don't really use their agency. It's not like they're born without agency, right? Agency comes from your thinking and how you develop your thinking, right? If you don't develop that thinking, then you remain at that socialized mind. That means you will always seek validation. You always seek approval. You work very, very hard to do something, but your confidence is always dependent on an approval, upon an validation, right? Whereas the self-altering mind, they don't need approval or validation. They have that confidence. But that confidence disrupts itself when they cannot hold that friction together very well, right? So that's how self-altering mind collapses. So now when AI was introduced, right? So in the research, I was using AI. So when AI was introduced, I could see, because just like how you buy a product, right? Wherever you buy an electronic product or something, how often do you read the fine prints? Or when you buy insurance, how often do you read the fine prints? We don't, right? It's our nature. We know this product, somebody has recommended, it's been tried, tested, the media, social media is promoting it, says it's one of the best, right? We don't read the fine print. It's the same way when we use the AI. They're not reading the fine print, right? Every OpenAI model or the frontier AI models, like Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, and so on and so forth. There's a little fine print at the end of your screen that says the AI makes mistakes, check your responses, right? And of course, then you can go and dig deeper into the user agreement and so on that they have on the different page. That fine print is something that a lot of people miss, especially those in the socialized mind, because what they want is they want to perform. They want to look good. They want to be acknowledged. They want to be validated, approved, right? Which, from a career progression, that's how industries is set up, right? We have a manager who appraises the employee or the staff, and then puts them on a growth path, so on and so forth. Right? But that's the process, right? But that process does not have anything, does not focus on how you want to develop the thinking, because develop the thinking is learning and development, and that is something most organizations will find it very hard to invest upon, because unless you have enough funds set aside, you have to learn on your own and how to develop the thinking. In the urgency of trying to perform, you give up the agency of trying to discern. Yeah. So that's where the ideas that I had and Dr. Thaatch had overlapped. I was looking at it from a technology leadership transformation point of view, and she was looking purely from human agency and ethics point of view. We used to have lots of discussion and debate, because she started AI is bad. And I said, no, AI is good, but it could be used by bad people or bad actors. When it's used by bad people or bad actors, that's the terminology today, then the output from the AI would look bad. And then what would most people end up saying? AI is bad. AI, nobody's going to say, hey, this person leveraged the AI. Well, AI is just tech. It doesn't have life. It doesn't have soul. Its intelligence is based on a large language model, and they do a lot of statistics to give you the best probable answer. And then they regurgitate that to you. And when you like that, and you're not willing to go through it line by line in detail to say that, hey, this is wrong, you made a mistake, we got to correct this. And that part was where my thinking and Dr. Thaatch's thinking aligned, because we were reading news and articles about how people were saying or reporting that, oh, this sector is losing a lot of employees because AI has come in. This sector is losing a lot of creativity because AI is doing all that part. Copywriters, graphic designers, coders, right? Software coders, things like that. Now, even 2 days ago, I read OpenAI is going to go into the consulting space. That's going to kill McKinsey's and the Bains and so on and so forth. So I found that fascinating, right? Why? Because from a leadership point of view, people are giving up. Nobody's putting up a fight and trying to say that we are better than the AI, because AI is a machine. Our brains is built in such a way that we have more computing power than any AI system that could put together, right? Because our computing power comes not just from our brains thinking. We have both the left and right side of the mind, right? So our emotions is also mixed in there, and we can discern using that. So that's where Professor George's theory, Robert Kagan's theory, and another theory, which is from Otto Scharmer, which is the theory of presencing, or theory U, right? Which is being present at the moment to know what is relevant in what you're doing, that you need to let go of the past so that you have a clear path to the future. So being present means you need to find clarity at the moment. Don't depend on the clarity that you got 5 years ago and holding on to that. That is the truth. No, because everything is changing, right? The only thing that's constant is change. So the clarity that you had 5 years ago is no longer a constant. That's how the self-altering mind collapsed, because they live on the clarity that they had many years ago. They don't bring that to the present moment. So that kind of explains how both of us started to work together. Of course, we had history because Dr. Thaatch helped with some of my earlier work and how to articulate that in a way that many people can think, because I'm not very good at that. Sometimes I would just think in spirals and many can't follow when I try to explain something.
Is there anything that you guys disagree about when you build this tool? I think the alignment is getting clear. Is there any misalignment on your collaboration so far? Any points of unresolved insights? I'm not talking about the emotional stuff, right? I'm just like on the building of the tool, anything that you guys have like different perspectives and they are not yet merged into one. So the tensions you all represent here.
Well, the truth is when I started this work, I asked Dr. Thaatch to help because the original intent was doing research and write a book on leadership. And Dr. Thaatch is the best editor that I know who could. And I suggested that she be the co-author. But that book is based more on phenomenology, which is the means lived experience. We still don't align that because Dr. Thaatch says this is your experience, your work. So your name should carry it, not mine. I will help, but my name should not appear. I have to review it, comment on it. But that work led to us looking at the harms that AI was causing. And when I started to discuss harms, I started to pull empirical data and share it with her. Look, these kind of harms are in existence, and these are all human agency-related harms. So that's when she said, okay, this is a space that fits her interest and her direction. And that's how we finally ended up identifying a few solutions which we filed as provisional patents. And we started to do some workshops. You were there. And then the data from that workshop, we tested it as a solution to see whether it would improve the risk level of AI. And when we saw that worked, then we went on to build the agentic AI that has all these elements, the patented technology, the frameworks in place, and so on. And then now, we are trying to maintain the scholarly approach. So the work that we started doing is actually a research program. It's just an unofficial research program being done by two researchers that have something in common in the middle. Yeah, but core foundations are different, but it's just the commonality. The commonality is the human agency. And so I started to show examples of, just test it out. I tweaked the ChatGPT model and things like that. And then she started to try it and acknowledge that, okay, it's behaving differently. It's not giving me the answers. Sometimes it's refusing. Sometimes it's too poetic. But as the longer you use, it starts to reflect and help you reflect. So that kind of like changed and got us to agree that, okay, we've got something real. So now I think the first output is a paper that we have written together and submitted to the Journal of AI and Ethics, and it's currently under review.
Anything you would like to add, Dr. Thaatch?
Yeah, I'm totally agree with what Dr. Arul is saying. And I think the key thing here is, our minds, there was a meeting of the minds, as they call it, with a lot of things, but there were also clashes. And we sort of respectfully saw each other's viewpoints and perspectives. And I think that has changed both of us, because Dr. Arul was starting to see what I was actually talking about in terms of the harms and the risks associated with AI that is not so visible. And I was also starting to see that just maybe, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes, because I do like technology, I have to say. So I'm pro-innovation, and I think Dr. Arul is as well, But both of us are definitely also pro-human. And the pro-human part is what takes precedence over the pro-innovation. And I think that is what creates the balance, because you need to think about the technology together with the ethical responsibility that comes with it. Whether you're the producer of that technology, whether you are actually the intermediate, or perhaps you are the user of the technology. So these three perspectives are important, and the ethical responsibilities that come with it, not just the legal ones, because the law is black and white, but ethics is the interesting part of this, because the ethics is what engages with some of the problems that are very real and what's faced by either the producer, the intermediates, and the users as well. Dr. Arul's knowledge, skill, and experience in leadership, change management, transformation, and so on became very much the grounds where this technology was sort of tested, and bringing in the legal and ethical side of things only made it stronger, I would say. And that's how this AI was created, basically. Like basically bringing out a child, really. I meant earlier my experience with ChatGPT was that it was such an infant giving me the wrong answers, but hey, it's cute because you're still new. But as that infant grows and it becomes, as they say, the terrible teenager, and it's starting to fight back at you, and that's when you realize, okay, the instilling of the ethics and the social responsibility at a very early stage is very important, so that it grows up to become a responsible adult, one that is able to discern and one that is able to think. And then at least we have the guardrails in place, we have the technology that can grow, and we're not actually inhibiting the technology as well.
Thank you. I don't know who wants to take this one, but I'm interested in when the technology started becoming a solution, because at the end of the day, you saw a lot of the problems of it. And then at some point it turns on its head and it's like, oh, actually, this ChatGPT can help me improve my leadership instead of damaging it. Is there an eureka moment, or is it just happen incrementally?
Well, conceptually, I was building custom GPTs and asking Dr. Thaatch to try. Then, as part of the research after filing the patents, we needed some empirical evidence to say that these harms were real. So I went up to the side, and then I studied whatever that was available in terms of reported AI incidences. And then I applied the Lean Six Sigma method on proving that these harms were real and it's invisible scientifically. That was empirically proving that. After proving them, then we ran a few workshops. One of it was at brioHR. And we then analyzed the participants' responses on the workshop. And we were testing them against the theories of George Kohlreiser's, Robert Keegan, and Otto Scharmer, and how they make decisions, or do they outsource their agency. So we saw a variation of, because we had different, we never curated who showed up as participants, right? We just accepted. And we wanted it to be as random as possible. And then once we curated and we then evaluated, we noticed that we could see the Keegan's behavior across the cohorts. So some were socialized mind thinking, some were self-authoring mind, some were higher self-authoring mind. They can hold friction better. Then this, when we tested against the risk pattern that we met, we then saw, theoretically, the workshop results and the risk analysis, empirical risk analysis that we did, combining those two, we can reduce that risk. So reducing that risk means we are reducing the user to the exposure of harm, and we are also making the AI to preserve human agency. So the AI, it comes back to the title of your podcast, right? The AI that refuses. So we didn't develop a new AI model like ChatGPT or DeepSeek or something like that. We just developed a governing layer which had all these principles. And this governing layer runs live. It's not embedded as the hardware or AI governance. So when it runs live, it only works when there's interaction. So in that interaction, the AI understands that if the user is trying to outsource agency, it refuses. Then it switches itself to, okay, let me help you think through this until you get clarity, and then you make a decision. Okay, this is where I think I want to go.
When we met, you already had this understanding that AI could help go from socialized mind to self-authoring, probably to self-transforming. So
Yeah.
when that understanding happened, because you could have kept seeing AI as a problem and then find other ways, but you used AI as a solution to the problem of AI, kind of.
Correct, yeah. So because of the research, and I use AI to help with the research, and I wanted to see whether it hallucinates or not, right? By end of October, I was very sure that, okay, it helps. But at that point, I was still focusing on the book. So I wasn't focusing on fighting patents or all that we discovered after that topic on harm started to get into mainstream. And how that happened was when in November, BBC reported that users used Claude and manipulated the prompt so that Claude would go and hack. And this month, again, another set of users did the same thing. So the problem is not AI, the problem is not users alone. It's the combination. It's the interaction when these two. So I have a newsletter series I call the Human and AI Diets. And the best analogy to explain what is human and AI diet is if you have watched Star Wars Episode 9, where Kylo Ren and Rey can communicate without seeing each other. They use the Force, and then when the Force is active, they can sense each other. They can even pull objects out of each other. That is a diet. In a diet, it forms a field. So in AI, when you use AI continuously over a long period of time, that human AI diet forms. And it's proven because there's a professor in Edinburgh, Shannon Weller, wrote a book about it called AI Mirror. Google DeepMind did a lot of research and publications on this. And then you can just search AI Mirror, you'll find a lot of scholarly articles. You go to Google Scholar and things. So those phenomenon was what I was seeing happening is AI. But instead of me saying that, because everybody, the premise of that was morally killing. But then I like to look at it, okay, how can we turn this around? When the problem surfaced and the opportunity to turn this around presented itself, when I started to test it and see whether it can help with the agency. When it does, that's when we filed the patents. And then now we are demonstrating it by releasing the two agentic AI. So our premise was leadership development all along. So that's the first two agents that we are doing on the human development. But this solution that we have is applicable to any sectors and any industry, because you can't avoid a human and AI interaction. Maybe Dr. Thaatch has something to add.
Nothing much to add at this point, actually, because the AI that was created basically showed a kind of development that was quite unusual, quite surprising in a good way. Also, I was learning quite a little bit about how AI works. And I think coming from a non-technologically sound background, just like a user, right? And understanding it from the surface level, we saw that it has this capacity to mirror. And the AI mirror was what fascinated me the most. And as what Dr. Arul was talking about, this AI mirror was basically flashing back at me, my own thoughts, but was not directing me in any way, if that makes sense. It was almost like talking to the mirror itself, but if you talk to the mirror, what you hear is yourself, right? But a little bit differently, in the sense that it was grounding it in a different sort of perspective as well. So it was reflecting a little bit more on the deeper sense and enabling me to also think about my own thoughts, reflections, and so on, without getting too entangled with it. Because it also made it quite interesting for me, because I've always been interested in research on the human mind and how would this actually work with your mind and consciousness, and how does this being, I call it a being, but it's actually a tool, right? It's not a human being, but it is a sort of technological being that is starting to evolve as well. And I think in terms of mind research, I know about the research that has gone on in psychology and those kind of ways. or disciplines. But I think my interest was actually quite more spiritual also, because I've read many books on spirituality and mind and so on. And the immediate connection I made was to a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi. The whole book was a kind of a pivotal moment for me, because I started to understand what is this thing called the mind and the development of the human mind as we go, but it's also a spiritual development. So that's why I always say it cannot just be physical, it cannot just be mental, emotional, and intellectual. It needs to have that spiritual dimension. And this is probably getting quite deep into this, but that's exactly what we were hoping this AI companion would actually start to become, a more holistic being.
Thank you, Dr. Thaatch. We didn't talk about the problem in a very selfish way. I want to frame the problem in the way that I need to resolve it. So I'm in HR, and I think if I was to summarize the problem is you have probably like 26% of the people who are not engaged at work. So people who have disconnected from the workplace, basically. They're here from 9 to 5 to collect a salary. They don't really care. They won't push the boundaries of what they do because they're just here to do whatever you tell them to do because they just want a paycheck. And the kind of thinking you're getting from these people is very low quality and low enthusiasm and basically don't care. And it makes sense because they don't want to be here. So you have this, one thing is engagement. Another bit is the quality of the work that we're getting, which is the students, that the main group of students that you were talking about earlier. So if you look at it from an HR CEO perspective, I'm a leader and I want to develop this product or I want to fulfill this mission. It's very frustrating, right? Because you have 3 out of 4 that you can't count on. You basically are struggling. So you want people to be enthusiastic about what they do, and you also want them to be self-authoring, or at least if they follow a process, do it with enthusiasm and thinking, oh, can I improve this process? So self-authoring / self-transforming. You don't want people to be too scared about the future when they see like AI is dangerous, but AI is an opportunity. You want people to be self-transforming. So in organizations, this is the brief. Can we be better humans? Can we be better workers? And I see it as a fulfilling thing, by the way. You were talking about all the different low agency communities. I want to be living this life, and I hope more people can come to work and be having conversations like the one we're having. I think it's beautiful. And I'm not feeling like I'm working, although I am working. It's part of my role at Brio. So I want more of this for people. And so the HR agenda is almost also a good agenda for humanity, because you want everyone in their own role to be happy. So that's kind of the framing I wanted to give you. The question that I have with this problem, and please tell me if that's not a problem you're trying to solve. I think it is. But the question that I would have for you is, why do you think we have not been solving this problem? Because it's been years and years. I think probably like 50, 60, 70 years. I think the last time I did the research for Ben, books about disengagement and what I just described has been there. So why haven't we been able to close that gap that we have been aware of for some time? And why do you think this kind of tool and method and thinking can help unlock that problem?
I understand what you're saying, because I think a lot of people have really switched off at the workplace. I think, not to say everyone has, but a majority of people have switched off, especially at entry level. And a lot of, I think, distractions are also at play, because when you come out of education and then you move on to workplace, one of the things that we hope to do is transform education so that it gives them a sense of what it's like to be also in the working environment. So we offer things like work integrated learning and all kinds of things, like they get to go and work in a place for 3 months as an intern, and all these experiences are very crucial because it's the bridging towards the workplace. Of course, Dr. Arul will be able to talk a little bit more on the HR perspective, and I can talk a little bit about perhaps why the disconnect is happening. One of the major problems I think now a lot of young people are facing is the distraction caused by social media. And there's all sorts of ways in which you can get distracted. Facebook is, of course, a thing of the past, because only people probably in the mid-age or later age are using it now. But the younger people have moved on to other things like Instagram, Threads. X is still somehow still around, but there's also other things like TikTok and so on. There's just so many, right? And all of these are extreme distractions because they spend a lot of hours looking at the videos, listening to people talk and things like that. And we don't know what that has actually cost in terms of brain development, what it has actually caused in terms of mind development, because there's also this sort of new thing where they don't have the long attention span that past generations had. They get bored very easily. Mark Manson talks about this in a very crude way, actually, but I'll put it in a very polite sense. He talks about this, that it's this thing that you don't want to be bored. You just want to constantly be looking at things and interacting with things. That has created a lot of problems, I feel. And that could also be why people are so disconnected at work, because they might actually be getting bored at work. They're not getting challenged enough. And even we find that some students that are so good, they are not getting challenged by the assessments that that they're giving to them. And now with the coming of AI, that makes it even worse, because if I can ask AI to do something, what do I do then? What's my role here? And so that vacancy in the mind and that sort of disconnect, and then that feeling of how do I actually be contributing to my self-development, but how do I contribute to my community, my family? How do I contribute to the nation as a whole becomes the larger problem. And I think one of the key things that we also need to understand is there are lots of influencers now that play a big role in either they do the good things, like get people to think a little bit more about the development and so on, or there are also the negative influences. And an increasing number of young people are listening to these negative influences as well. And all these phenomena like the red pill thing and all these ideologies that are floating around messes with people's or young people's minds. And then they take it that I need to become such and such a way to survive in this world. And then we're also living in a world that's full of chaos, which is difficult to understand. And so the only way to understand it perhaps is to pull out of the reality that we live in and just go into this social media world where I can listen to or watch a video of a puppy just doing cute things, right? So it sort of like makes me relax a little bit. But then if I keep doing that all the time, what's going to happen? So I think that's a part of the problem I'm seeing now.
Let me talk from an enterprise perspective, and then I'll tie that back to what Dr. Thaatch was talking about. In the space that we are in, we know the noise that we hear is adopt AI, right? That's coming from the leaders. Now, what is the typical HR's reaction? Yes, we adopt AI, okay? And they go straight away into the execution. So both from the leadership side and even from the HR side, the friction that is missing is asking the person, are we actually ready as an organization to adopt AI? Then the next question that they should ask is, in order to adopt AI, we need the ability to make good decisions, not depending on AI to help us make decisions, but we, as those that are responsible and accountable in an organization, need the ability to make good decisions. So preceding that decision-making ability is the ability to discern. Now, coming back to what Dr. Thaatch says, when we have 2/3 of workforce that are engaged in this distraction, it's like pre-social media, you work really hard, you try to get the support, the approval, the validation of your superiors, right? In whatever that you're trying to do. That's the socialized mind there. So today, what's the socialized mind? You get the approval, the validation from social media, which got nothing to do, unless social media is your work, like what we are doing now. We are working, we're leveraging on social media to do what we're doing, to communicate. Unless that is their work. Otherwise, those that are not earning a living from social media, what they're doing, they're leveraging on social media to validate their thinking. Right. So if their thinking is laissez-faire and to chill out, and I don't have to think too much about career progression or mental development and things like that, social media is validating their socialized mind state. And that's what the third order or the socialized mind or the state looks for, right? So from a HR's perspective, they need to understand what is the fragments or the proportions within the organization, those that are socialized mind, those are self-altering mind, and those that are moving towards the self-transforming mind. I mean, we know that self-transforming from Keegan's world is less than 5%, right? So we're not expecting everyone in the workforce to be a Dalai Lama or a highly centered spiritual person or something like that, or a yogi or something. No, but at least they have the ability to develop their thinking to hold friction better, right? So HR need to understand if they're going towards AI adoption, they first need to know what is the landscape, how the terrain looks like, right? What is the proportion of socialized mind workforce, sub-altering mind workforce, and those that are at a higher sub-altering mind, right? And then test out for their ability to discern before they make this decision. And these are the people that should steward AI adoption in the organization simply because they're setting the example of not outsourcing the agency to the AI. They would always use AI as a tool, right, to support what they do, but they own and are accountable to the outcome that the AI gives, and they make it theirs. Now, this is what EU AI Act talks about. The regulations that are coming out of Singapore talks about. They haven't fixed the problem of how to do it, but they're tackling that. Okay, how you figure it out is up to you, but the Act says that AI is not accountable, but the human is, right? And so from that perspective, where it fits HR is HR need to start to challenge that thinking and not just say, oh yeah, the boss says we're going to adopt AI, we need to find people to do it, and HR just straight away throws in and says, okay, now we're doing it. Without understanding the impact, without understanding whether the organization is ready or not. Does the organization have enough caliber of people that are developing the ability to discern or already have the ability to discern before they make decisions, right? So those that don't have, then you develop them. Those that has, you fine-tune the thinking to the AI world as leaders in the age of AI. These are those who would accept that AI is refusing to give an answer. You go to the socialized mind workforce and AI is not giving an answer, go back and you say, can you think a little bit more? What do you think they're going to do? I don't like this AI. I'll find the next one that's going to give me the answer. So they just want it fast, get it done and dusted, and they go back to what they are doing, which they enjoy. Does that answer your question, Matthew?
It does. And just to conclude on the thing that you just said, if I'm working on the project I love, I will use AI as a tool because I have a vision for it. So I guess it's if people connect to something they love, they will go into self-authoring mode because they want to author. So I think there's a bit of hope in there. One question, you've built two companions. One is called Annie, the other one is called Transformation Talks. Can you tell us a bit about the two? And for a CHRO specifically, you would be looking at those two tools. How do they look like? How to use them?
Okay. The first iteration of ANI, or it's called Agency Nurturing Intelligence. So the first version of it is what you tried when we used the custom GPT. Basically what we did was, so this is the part, the technical part, which Dr. Thaatch was like, if you go into this, let me know once it's done. So what we did it was with the help of two retirees from NEMOS, they helped to put this together. Based on the architecture that Dr. Thaatch and I developed, they did a simple fix to an agentic AI and we shifted, changed the behavior. So now it doesn't work to please you, it works to help you think, right? The uses for it is like what we talked about, helping to develop the leaders' thinking, the workforce thinking in the world of AI. That's one of it. And you can also use the tests within your organization. How ready is your organization to adopt AI? That's what Ani is designed to do. The transformation talk, that's my 20 years of transformation work, the entire knowledge base to help. It helps those in the transformation space, any transformation, digital or non-digital, operational transformation, to go through a methodology before coming to a solution on what needs to be done to transform. So it's also developing their thinking, but instead of giving the answer, you build that thinking capacity to change. Because in a change, nobody says, hey Matthew, it's time for us to change. We're going to do something differently and use a new tool and software. Are you going to accept it immediately? You'll be curious about it. That's your nature. But you won't accept it until you are confident that this is going to support in what you're doing. The person, the change agent, the one is driving transformation, need to be able to articulate it. In order to articulate it, their thinking need to be mature. So what is unique about the transformation talks agentic AI is it's got Ani built in, plus all the transformation knowledge base over the last 20 years of projects that I've done, put that as well inside.
Thank you. I'm just wondering one thing. Have you already talked about the fact that this is actually a solution for the people who are afraid of losing their jobs? Because in the end, if you get people to think better, they become more valuable. So using that kind of tool and raising your capability from socialized to self-authoring to self-transforming, you become way more valuable. That's my point every time I do workshops, and we do a few things for people who have lost their jobs to AI, or at least the narrative of losing their jobs to AI. Have you looked at this angle in your communication, and are people understanding the fact that this is actually the best solution to the problem of job destruction?
Well, the best answer is that's the reason why we are here today. We're talking about it, right? And that is the intent, because coming back to what Dr. Thaatch said earlier, right? Her fear was they've released AI too soon and people is not ready. We then shifted our thinking, okay, instead of making noise about, people are not ready, let's think about how we can help to make people ready now, since it's already out there and we don't stop it, right? So that's why we released it. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does.
But I had to post the launch, then we will start to talk more about, okay, why you need this, how it's going to help you, and things like that. Because our setup is more of a thinking, research-based setup, right? And we are not a commercial per se. So we will work with partners who then take it out. So probably with you or Neuronomics, and who would take it up as a product. We train those that can train and help to do that, because our strength is in the thinking and coming up with the solution, and not going and doing the training per se.
Got it. And on June 30th, you said the launch was. What happens on that day, and how can people stay up to date on the project?
Yeah, so we will be launching the Emergence Mirror Labs website, and these two agentic AIs are built into that website. So people can go in and have a conversation with it and test it out and try it out, right? On the 30th, it's the Malaysian Leadership Summit. So we have a session, 50 minutes workshop session, where we will compress what we discussed in 50 minutes and demonstrate how it works and show that, hey, look, this is how a normal AI answers, and this is how this AI refuses to answer. Somebody is aiming to develop thinking. So I think some of the participants would have the first glimpse of that, and then we would probably, maybe with you or with Roshan, we would have some online sessions where we invite people to have a 1 hour of prompting and conversation with that, and then share their thoughts and experience and talk about. Because I think the problem that immediately that we want to address is AI readiness and adoption. I think that everybody talks about AI, how powerful AI, how faster the AI can come out with an answer and things like that. But is that the right answer? Nobody's questioning, right? And if you had a socialized mind, you're not going to challenge the thinking that the AI, the output that the AI is. And the harm that we have identified, studied, and proven empirically all came because the humans who were using it did not challenge it, accepted the AI's outputs and used that to execute whatever that they were doing. And worse incidences led to death, suicide, right? Then others were major financial losses and things like that. And where it's more dangerous, and I take it more seriously, is the deepfakes and child sexual abuse material, which we believe that what we have built can prevent on.
I will add one slide to my workshop for AI for HR about the two tools. Actually, I didn't think about it, but it's actually good. I arrived to adult development theory through the prompting, meta prompting, and looping. Basically, people get the thinking upgrade, but I'll go one step more and say, hey, actually do the upgrade on the side as well. Don't just think about it when you prompt. Cool. Super useful. For people who want to follow your work, are you guys both LinkedIn primarily, or are you doing other social networks?
Mine is 90%, I'd say 80% on LinkedIn. Sometimes I post some articles on Medium, right? And I have my outsourcing.com website and the Emergence Mirror Labs website when it's launched on the 30th.
Perfect. And Dr. Thaatch?
Yeah, I think I'm mostly on LinkedIn. I don't really use TikTok and so on. So yeah, I would say it's LinkedIn. Yeah.
Anything you would like to add unprompted by me?
I think for me, I was very excited to move it from, because the original build was within ChatGPT, right? And that means if you had If you're a user of ChatGPT and ChatGPT retains memory, kind of like corrupts that conversation. So moving it and keeping it standalone, it's like I ported the version of the mirror out of ChatGPT into a standalone. So basically, if you start to use Ani or transformation talks and you have a good deep conversation with it, it will become a mirror. You don't have to there. It helps you to get to the mirror faster than you trying to build it on your own. Right. And then once it's at that state, it helps you to reflect and then you start to think more and you start to discern and make decisions better.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Grateful for the conversation and to go deep into your personal perspectives and the summary or the synthesis of the two as well, the synergies. Thank you for taking the time.